Hello and welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I interview founders doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on people with a connection to Latin America. My guest today is Lisa Besserman, founder and CEO of Startup Buenos Aires. Originally from New York, Lisa was on a more traditional startup employee track when she decided she wanted to work remotely. She chose Buenos Aires for a 2-month trial period, but ended up falling in love with the city and the entrepreneurial culture, which led her to quit her job. What started as a few entrepreneurs meeting up in a friend's house to talk about startup problems led to creating Startup Buenos Aires, an organization that represents the Buenos Aires startup, tech, and entrepreneurial community, and has gotten buy-in from locals, expats, and even the city government. We talk about what it's like doing business in Argentina, opportunities for venture capital investment, and the changes she's seen in the ecosystem over the past 5 years. I think Lisa provides a really interesting insight into what's going on in the Argentine entrepreneurship ecosystem, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello, Lisa. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
No, of course. Thanks for taking the time to do it. So where are you in the world today?
So right now I am currently located in Austin, Texas, and I tend to split my time between Buenos Aires, New York, and Austin now.
So let's talk about Buenos Aires. What do you have going on down in Argentina?
So I'm still running Startup Buenos Aires. We are the organization that represents the startup, tech, and entrepreneurial community in Buenos Aires, Argentina. We operate on 3 platforms, which is education, community, and resources. And one of our missions is really to put Buenos Aires on the map of global startup ecosystems while also providing opportunities to entrepreneurs and startups in Latin America. We serve as a conduit to bring international initiatives, working with global companies, and really just providing a support system for startups in the region who are looking to scale and build bridges between Argentina and other startup communities around the world.
How long have you been doing Startup Buenos Aires?
So we launched in May of 2013. So we are at our 5-year anniversary, actually.
Congratulations. The 5-year anniversary episode then.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. Lots of ups, lots of downs, different government changes, different initiatives, and the growth and the evolution of Argentina and Buenos Aires as a startup ecosystem has just been incredible, and we're so happy to be a part of it. So it has been quite a journey, and it's really been great, and I'm looking forward to the next 5 as well.
So I'm going to dig in more on Startup Buenos Aires in a bit, but I want to jump back to you. So how did you end up in Argentina? Where are you from originally, and how did you end up down in Buenos Aires?
Sure. So I'm originally from New York City, and at the time I was working for a tech company. This is back in 2012. I was working for a tech company in an overpriced flat in Manhattan, and winter was coming, if you will, for all the Game of Thrones fans out there. Winter was coming, and I wanted to avoid the New York winter. And my lease was up in my overpriced apartment. And so I asked my company if I could work remotely just for a few months to escape that New York winter. Our team was distributed, so I ran a team of programmers and developers and QA, mostly distributed between Silicon Valley, and then we had a dev team in Russia, and then I was in the New York office with our COO. So we already had a distributed team. So I asked if I could work remotely, and my company obliged. They said for a few months I could go. And so I looked at a map and I said, okay, where is it warm and where can I be in a similar time zone to still, do work and speak with my clients and my team. And I heard great things about Buenos Aires. I had never been, didn't speak a word of Spanish, but I heard it was a really great city. And at the time, it was only meant to be a 2 or 3 month, working adventure. And so I packed my bags and my laptop and bought a ticket and flew down to Argentina.
So a lot of people that listen to this podcast, there's actually sort of 3 big groups. There's Latin American entrepreneurs, there's US investors, and then there's a lot of people that are in or your situation when you were in New York thinking about making the jump either as digital nomad to LatAm and working for their own company or doing some outsourcing work, or potentially going to join a company in Latin America. Can you talk a little bit more about advice that you would give to them about how they could go about either getting out of the job that they're in now or making the jump to Latin America?
Sure. When I did this back in 2012, it was before the term digital nomad existed. So I feel there was less of a support system and less of an infrastructure that supported this type of move. But now it's become so, widely accepted that I think, companies recognize that teams can be remote. And I think it's really just about showing your worth to your company. If you want to keep your job, but work remotely or work from a new location or try this whole digital nomad experience, it's really just about, saying your case and explaining to your company that you'll have more productivity or a lower cost of living, and, express to them that this is something that would, help you stay as a loyal and happy employee. And I think a lot of companies are more and more open to that scenario. If you are looking to, let's say, start a company in a foreign country like I did, or look for roles as a local, as a foreigner in another country, I'd say the most important thing is to understand the environment at which you're going into. You can't expect things to work as they do in your own home country. There's a lot of different, ways of doing business. There's a lot of different cultural differences between people like countries like the US or Europe and Latin America. So it's really just about understanding these cultural nuances and working to their advantages, rather than expecting things to work out and function the way that they do it in your home country. And I think by recognizing that, it'll really save a lot of challenges that will come up along the way.
So one of the people that I had on the podcast previously is Amir Saliafendic from Doist. And I think they have 70 people completely distributed, I think in 50 countries around the world. And he thinks that basically being remote is the future of work, and it has all sorts of big benefits. So you were remote as a worker, and then also on the other end of maybe doing helping with outsourcing from Argentina to the US. And now you're in Austin working with your team in Argentina. What do you think about working remotely, and do you like it, and has it worked for you?
Yes, absolutely. I think everybody works at different paces, in different scenarios, at different times best. And it's really important to leverage the fact that we are in this global economy, the fact that we do have this connectivity with the internet and, different software. There's just so many options to stay connected with your team, and everybody works in different capacities. So by really taking that to your advantage and to your team's advantage, I think it's only going to make the workforce much better. And, it'll save costs, of course, as far as operating costs on office space and, other things that come around with having a physical location. And I think it just makes everybody happier, because some people do work better from home. Some people do work better in a co-working space. Some people do want to spend the winters in a warm environment. And as long as they're productive and as long as they're producing results, I think that it makes sense to give them this opportunity. And it makes sense for the bottom line. You're saving money, your customers, your employees are happy, the teams are happy. And as long as everyone is able to, have those results and work together in a cohesive and collaborative way, whether it's in person or remotely, then I think it definitely makes sense. And, and we are living in this global economy. We are living in a globalized environment where we can have conversations and conference calls and, meetings in much different locations and time zones. So, why not leverage that to create, a much better environment for your team and for your company?
And how much has that changed since 2013 or so, since you were first working remotely to today?
Oh, it's changed significantly. When I moved to Argentina, there really wasn't this prevalent this prevalent software available for this type of remote expansion or remote team correspondence. The only thing I had at the time was Skype and Google Hangouts. So, now we have Basecamp, we have Trello, we have, all of these project management software tools. We have all of these voice over IP options, and none of this existed. And now, because there's been this emergence of this whole digital nomad culture and working remotely, experiences for these teams, there's just a lot more software to go along with it. And I think technology has only helped and allowed people to take advantage and allowed companies and teams to take advantage of this really wonderful experience as far as working remotely and having distributed teams. So I'd say, just the technology has evolved and the software has become more prevalent, and it's only made everybody's jobs and lives easier.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And one of the things that I find interesting is that many software and tech companies now have an office in New York and an office in San Francisco, or maybe San Francisco and Phoenix, or San Francisco and Austin. And they don't think of that as having a distributed team or remote work because it's just two offices in the US. Whereas those same companies, if they have someone in Eastern Europe or in Latin America, they think it's outsourcing. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that, being in Buenos Aires and working with U.S. teams, and that attitude that maybe you've seen?
Sure. Well, we're in a unique position because our business model. So just to give you kind of like a brief background. So Startup Buenos Aires, we are a free community. We offer free resources. Everything we do, all of the initiatives, events is all free. So we don't want the community to pay for anything because we recognize that starting a startup is difficult. Being an entrepreneur in Latin America is even more difficult because there's a lot less funding available. So we wanted to keep the community free, but we needed to find a way to fund our operations. And what we recognized was there was just an incredible amount of human capital, specifically in tech talent in Argentina. They call them software factories or dev shops, dev studios, software development firms. There was just an incredible amount of this tech talent. And what we recognized was that, these development agencies and studios, they wanted US clients, but they had no way to get there. So what we did was we created an offshoring or an outsourcing hub. So we have a talent database of the leading developers and dev studios. And what we do is we connect them with companies in the US and in Europe who are looking to offshore in either entire IT teams or projects. So like a mobile app development project, a web project, and an IoT project. And so what we've done is we've created this bridge between the tech talent in Argentina and the companies who are looking for cost-effective solutions for technology in other countries. And so for us, it's been, it's been who we are. It's been what we've been doing for the past, I'd say, three and a half years. And it helps everyone. The local developers, they're happy because now they have access to these clients. And then the international clients are now happy because they have access to this really incredible human capital. And it's at a much lower cost. So it's a much more cost-effective solution, and it allows them to use their funding in other ways. And they're getting the results that they would still be getting if they had a team locally. So for us, we've always been really big advocates for outsourcing and offshoring because there's talent everywhere. Everywhere you go in the world, there's talent. And if you can find that talent on a similar time zone at a much lower cost, then why not take advantage of that and use that to increase your bottom line?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I want to jump back to your arrival to Argentina. So you get down there to start working remotely for your company. What was it like? Did you have culture shock getting there, or did you just fit right into your schedule?
So that's a good question. There were a few hiccups along the way. I'd say most of the culture shock I experienced wasn't really on a social level, but on a business level when I started Startup Buenos Aires. But when I arrived, and I can touch into that in a little bit, but when I arrived as a remote worker, the challenges I faced was I arrived during the summer, and Argentina has a really shaky infrastructure when it comes to internet. In the summertime, there's a lot of blackouts, Wi-Fi goes out, it's very common. And so for me, coming from the US, where that was never even a consideration or an issue, not having Wi-Fi or having a blackout, that it really hindered my work and my performance at times, because I'd be in the middle of a conference call or I'd be talking to an employee or to a client, and I would just lose Wi-Fi, and I'd have to pack up all my stuff and find a cafe a few blocks away that still had working internet. So that was a big challenge, I think, that I definitely did not anticipate. On a personal level, I found the culture of Argentina to be really warm and welcoming. The people were really kind, and it was very easy to jump into a social setting and make new friends. Everybody was really open, and it was just a really welcoming environment. So socially, I had no issues. I thought it was just this really wonderful and warm environment where people were very open and happy to connect with foreigners. When I started Startup Buenos Aires, that's when I started to really understand the cultural nuances between doing business in the US and doing business in Latin America. And this happened when, the idea of Startup Buenos Aires was born. I had this great idea. I was like, I want to help founders. I want to help the startup community. I want to build this, I want to build this organization that really, it has a truly altruistic mission. It was only to help improve the lives of entrepreneurs in Latin America. And I recognized I was a foreigner. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have a network there. So what I wanted to do was connect with influencers and connect with people who are already doing really great things that people know, people trust, tell them about my mission, and then get them on board. I felt that was the best way to do this. So I started reaching out via email to people I heard about or people I knew, just a few degrees of separation, or people I read about. And I just gave them my pitch. I'm Lisa. This is what I'm doing. I come from the US. This is what I want to do. Like, do you want to be a part of this? And I never asked for anything in return. I just wanted to get their advice or their opinions, or just have them be a part of this movement that I was looking to build. And I did not get one response. And I thought that was really strange because, my pitch was very to the point. It was, I was clearly expressing what I was looking to do and how I was going to help people. And not one person wrote back. And I thought that was really, really strange. And then finally, someone wrote back. Martin Franco, he's the founder of Área Tres. He's half American, half Argentine. And I believe he wrote back because of the American side of him. And he wrote me back. He's like, listen, I'm interested in what you're doing. You're doing it all wrong, though. Let's meet and we'll talk about it. And so during this meeting, he basically told me that my email came off extremely abrasive because I was approaching this from this very efficient manner of doing business. Like I'm stating what I need, or I'm stating what I'm doing, stating how I can help. And that was it. He's like, you never once asked to meet somebody. You never once asked somebody for coffee. You never once, just offered to build a relationship with that person. You were just kind of getting right to the point in a business manner. I was like, well, that's what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to build a business. Like, I don't understand why anybody would want to meet me. Like, they don't know me. He's like, just try a different approach. It's like, okay. So I went back to all the people I emailed a few weeks later, and I decided to completely change the approach. And instead of talking about my business, instead of talking about my ideas, instead of talking about how I was going to, create this community, I just asked them for a cup of coffee and if they wanted to meet. And the response rate was 100%. Every single person wanted to meet me for coffee and took me up on my invitation. And I thought that was crazy, coming from New York, where time is so valuable and we value, efficiency over relationships. That was something that was really eye-opening for me. And once I changed my approach and once I started meeting people, I recognized that, in Latin America, people value relationships before they value business. And they won't even consider doing business with you until they know you as a person, not just on a business level, but on a personal level. And so, that for me was really eye-opening, just having to change my approach and forego, some of that efficiency and that time in order to build those relationships, which was fundamental in doing business in Argentina and Latin America. So that was definitely a culture shock in terms of having to change my approach and do things, in the way that they are done culturally in the place I was living.
That's super interesting because I had a very similar kind of an experience starting Magma, where we spent lots of time just meeting people for coffees in 2014, 15, and even into maybe 2016. But as we've grown, and our team hasn't grown all that much until very recently, we sort of have tried to retrain the market to be more like the New York style of, let's try to get as much done via email, and then we'll do a call or a coffee meeting if we're really getting somewhere. And I'm not sure how it's really worked so far, but it's something that we've been doing. Have you tried going, once you've met people and sort of established yourself with Startup Buenos Aires, going back the other way, or have you kept it the same of still going for that one-on-one relationship at the beginning?
So in the beginning, I needed to completely assimilate to the culture of Latin America, even if it was at the cost of efficiency. But once we started to grow and started to gain some traction and brand recognition, I found that it was a lot easier to integrate that US way of doing business, where we do focus on efficiency and quickness rather than not I don't want to say wasting time, but rather than spending all that time building the relationships. So for me, I find that the most successful entrepreneurs, at least in Latin America, who do business in Latin America, are those that do understand the way that business is done in the culture that's necessary to do business, but also integrate this efficiency into it, like we do business in New York or in Europe. And I think finding that sweet spot is what will enable you to scale quickly. You're not missing out on either sides. And there's a quote that I love. Torsten Colin from U-Noodle had it in one of his presentations, and he said, Latin America, where opportunity meets inefficiency. And I loved that. And I think that's so apropos of how things are done in Latin America. And really, once you can find that opportunity and once you can bring in a level of efficiency, I think that's where the sweet spot is. And so what we've done is, we do definitely understand the importance of relationship building. But as you have done with Magma, we have done the same thing. And we've brought in, we have to reel it in sometimes, and Argentines, they like to theorize, they like to strategize. And execution sometimes is a little slow. And so what we have to do is kind of reel things in and just say, okay, this is a great idea. What's our next action? What are our next action points? What are we going to do next? And then we have to really focus on executing and not just talking about, the theories behind things, or just meeting for infinite cups of coffee. So I think those who are able to find that sweet spot are able to scale the quickest and do the best in the region.
No, yeah, I think that makes sense. And so going back to right when you were starting Startup Buenos Aires, you had a really nice job where you were stable and you're probably making good money for the local economy and living well. What made you decide to give that up to start something new?
It's a great question. I'm what I would call an accidental entrepreneur. I never had aspirations of being an entrepreneur when I was younger. I never envisioned myself to run a company. I always thought I'd be a leader in business, but never on my own dime. So the jump to entrepreneurship was not a natural one for me. Some people know they want to do this their whole lives, and when they find the opportunity, they do it. For me, it was not a natural progression. In fact, I call myself the accidental entrepreneur because I saw a problem, a very, very clear problem, which was there was no community. There was no startup community in Argentina, and there was no support system on any level, private or public sector. And I believed that I could create that solution. Crazy. I mean, I looking back, I don't know what I was thinking, but I truly at the time believed that I could create this solution by connecting the dots and building this community and building bridges. And, in that process, I accidentally became an entrepreneur. And the decision was not easy. I started building it slowly on the side. It was like a little side hustle. I never really envisioned a business model. I never imagined leaving my job, but then I came to this proverbial crossroads, and it was time to go back to the US. It was, about 3 months at the time, and it was time to go back to my job and to my life. And I knew it was one of those things where I either have to throw all the chips in on the table or I have to pack up and leave. And I just wasn't ready to leave. I had a feeling that this could be something big. I had a feeling that it could make a real impact. And I already started to see that it was, in its very nascent days. And it was just one of those moments where I knew that I would regret it if I didn't do it. And even if I did it and I failed, at least I would learn a lot along the way, and I would make great contacts along the way, and maybe I would change a few lives. But if I didn't do it, it was something that I would always wonder, what if? So, I put my life savings into creating the organization, and I'm very fortunate that the community got behind it and that a really wonderful team got behind the vision. And we were able to, build this real startup ecosystem and start working with the government too, which was just unbelievable to us. We had never expected something like that to happen. So, I'm very lucky and fortunate, but I do recognize that it does take a village. And in my case, it took an entire city. So, yeah.
So speaking of the village, you start meeting people for coffees when you're just getting started after taking advice to spend the time relationship building. What happened next? How were you able to build Startup Buenos Aires into what it is today?
So that's an excellent question too. So when I started speaking with people, I was canvassing successful entrepreneurs, investors, people who were leaders in the community already. And what I wanted to gauge was what they needed or what could have been around earlier to help them speed up the process of them scaling and of them growing. And, at the time I was very fortunate. I got to meet with people like Hernan Caza, one of the founders of Mercado Libre, Nico Berman, a VC at Kazek, Vanessa College, she runs the Clarín Accelerator. So I really got to meet with some extremely high profile, high level people, and to get their experiences and to hear what they could have had to take advantage of or could have utilized if they were when they were growing their companies. I started to recognize, there were patterns. Like, what did the city need? What did people want? And what could we actually provide them? And then that's where we essentially came up with this platform of education, community, and resources. So we recognized that we needed to provide things that the community needed, but also add value in a way that they would want to be a part of it. So, we recognized that there wasn't a lot of formal education for entrepreneurship available in Argentina, or it just was too expensive and people couldn't access that. So we built this platform as a way to fulfill the needs of the community. And I think that was one of the most pivotal and important moments of our growth, was to recognize, like, this is what the people want, this is what they need, how can we fulfill it, and how can we do it for them and build it for them? So we did that, and then we launched, and we had a town hall kind of meeting, and there was maybe 100 people there. And at the time, we had no idea what we were going to do, but we knew we were going to do something. And so we really called upon the city and the community to tell us what they needed and what they wanted, and how we can fulfill it. And in that process, people were offering things too. People said, we had someone come in and say, hey, I've run, 5 successful crowdfunding campaigns. I'd be happy to do a session on crowdfunding. Or we had an investor come in and say, hey, I know a lot of people have issues with their pitches. Let's do something with pitching to investors. And then Google came to us and they said, hey, we want to run this Launchpad Accelerator program, help us. And then Facebook came to us. So it was just kind of like a grassroots movement where we just, as simply as it is, we recognized what the city needed and wanted, and we tried to find ways that we can provide that for them. And in that process, we were able to grow and become this mega startup hub within the city.
So a lot of cities, both in Latin America and in the US or Europe, also think about the things that they can do to start building their ecosystem. And you were there from pretty early in the ecosystem and were a key part in building it. What were some of the most successful things that you think other cities should think about replicating if they haven't done it already, that were really successful for you in Buenos Aires?
Yeah, I think what tipped the needle in Argentina was the government getting involved, and that's not easy. Of course, it's not an easy thing. But once the administration changed, and once the new president understood that entrepreneurship and human capital is what can save Argentina and what can define Argentina as a global power, they started investing in resources, in education programs, in incubator programs, and accelerator programs. And once the government got involved and started creating these public programs and initiatives, that's what really was pivotal in the evolution of the city. So us being a private player and other private accelerator programs or co-working spaces, of course we add value, and of course we're building these micro communities. But once the government gets involved and they have access and they have a reach that we could never have, it really has the ability to shape an ecosystem and build bridges beyond anyone's reach. For us, our experience changed once the administration changed and once President Macri came into power, and his administration recognized the importance of entrepreneurship and of startups. So once governments get involved and they start working with local players, and that's something that Argentina did right. They recognized they can't do it on their own. So they targeted the private organizations like Startup Buenos Aires and other co-working spaces and other accelerated programs that were already doing things for the community. And they wanted to work with them. And I think once you're able to create that intersection between private and public and build these programs and these initiatives on, not just a micro level, but on a macro level, it really has the ability to shift and build this real ecosystem to not only be strong, but also sustainable.
So let's talk about that ecosystem a little bit. What are some of the programs that the government are putting in or supporting in Buenos Aires and Argentina in general?
Sure. So the city government has two really incredible programs that we've been very close with, which is BA Emprende, which is an educational program. It's a course that entrepreneurs can take for free. And it gives them access to mentors, it has different design thinking sprints, and just really teaches them the fundamentals of running a company and being an entrepreneur in Argentina and how to scale. So that's an educational program. And then Incubate, which is very, very new. We worked on the structure and the formulation of the incubator program with the city government. And I actually headed the global PR campaign to expand the program globally. And so Incubate is a public incubator program similar to Startup Chile, where they're awarding between 10 and 30,000, the equivalent of 10 and 30,000 US dollars to startups over 10 verticals. And they're providing 1 year of office space, access to mentors, access to government resources, in addition to the equity-free funding. So, those two programs, I think, are really going to make a big impact in the city, and they already have started to. But we'll also, put a positive spotlight on the city and attract more global entrepreneurs to the city, whether it's to set up operations or to hire teams or to come to Argentina if they're interested in the Latin American market and participate in these programs as well. And the national government, they've done a lot of great things over the past couple of years. They have their Ley de Emprendedores, which is the entrepreneur's law, which makes it easier to invest in Argentina. It makes it quicker to get a tax ID number and a bank account for startups who are looking to start up quickly and efficiently. They created a fund of funds of about $15 million, which is similarly modeled after the the Startup Nations in Israel, where they're investing in existing funds, and in which case those funds can then invest in other startups. So it's about a $15 million fund of funds, they call it. So there's just been a lot of really positive initiatives that are happening led by the government. But at the same time, they're also incorporating these private institutions and private organizations to be a part of it, because they know that they can't manage it all. And they recognize that their strength might not necessarily be in investing. So why not invest in the investors, or have educators run the certain programs, or have other accelerators and incubators be a part of their incubator program. So they're really doing a great job collaborating with the local community while also providing these really fantastic resources to the entrepreneurial community.
How about in the private sector? What are some of the, outside of Startup Buenos Aires, what are some of the other institutions or groups that you think are really important in helping create that ecosystem in Buenos Aires and Argentina as a whole? Sure.
So NXTP Labs is huge. They're a fantastic accelerator program. They're doing a lot with the community. Guaira is around in Argentina as well. Kazek is a big venture capital firm in the city. There's Área Tres, which is a co-working space and a community. La Macanita, another co-working space and community. WeWork has recently come into the city. So there are a lot of these connectors and collaborators that are really doing their part to build this community and work with one another, which is really important. So we've worked with everyone I've just named, we've worked with, and everyone's very open to working with one another, which I think is really fantastic. And that's fairly new. Before, when we started Startup Buenos Aires, it wasn't a very cohesive type community. It wasn't a very collaborative environment. It just, because in Latin America, there's, this feeling of distrust, based on historical issues, whether it's macroeconomic or political. And so having this new wave of entrepreneurship and this new culture of startups, and, that's only helped create a more collaborative and cohesive environment in the city.
And how about the companies that are there? Some of the biggest success stories in Latin America have come out of Argentina. Probably the biggest success stories outside of Brazil have come out of Argentina. Can you talk about the ecosystem a little bit more and why you think that Argentine entrepreneurs have done so well?
Sure. Well, most of the unicorns emerging from Latin America have come from Argentina. That's a fact. And I think the reason why Argentine entrepreneurs and startups have reached this level of success, especially comparatively speaking to the rest of Latin America, is because entrepreneurship is embedded in their DNA. I have never met a more resilient class of entrepreneurs than I ever have in Argentina. And I think a lot of it is because of, or in spite of, that macroeconomic instability or political turmoil that the country has faced, or just lack of infrastructure. That it's very difficult to do things, or historically speaking, it's been very difficult to do things in Argentina. So people have had to create, different ways of managing their own success. It's not a straight line from A to B in Argentina. You always have to get around the system, or do something and create your own, your own innovative ways to succeed. And people just aren't used to having that support that we take for granted, perhaps in the U.S., whether it's from governments or from other institutions. And I think it's just created this really strong sense of entrepreneurship. And, they don't have the luxury of the stability that it takes to work for a corporation. In the US, why do people work for corporations? Because it's great pay, or there's, health insurance, or there's stability. Whereas in Argentina, that doesn't exist. So people say, why would I work for somebody else and not have any of those things if I could just work for myself and create my own success, or create, my own hours? And so I think a lot of it has to do with the history of Argentina, and it's created this really strong, resilient class of entrepreneurs that I truly have never seen anywhere else. And they're innovative, they're smart, they're creative, they're early adopters of technology, and they recognize from a very, very early standpoint that they have to have global ambitions if they want to succeed and if they want to scale, because the Argentine market is not strong enough to sustain a company or a company's growth. Whereas in places like Brazil, they can focus on the Brazilian market because it's large enough and expansive enough where that's big enough. Whereas in Argentina, they recognize from day one that if they want to succeed and if they want to scale, they need to think globally.
And what are some of the problems that Argentine entrepreneurs are solving with their businesses that you've seen?
Well, we've seen a really huge emergence of fintech coming out of Argentina, fintech startups. When Bitcoin first started coming out, I know Argentines were the earliest adopters of Bitcoin, and they were the most amount of Bitcoin startups than any other country. This is years ago. And I think a lot of it has to do with the financial institution and the challenges that they face with the infrastructure within Argentina. So, when there's a challenge or where there's a problem, they have to look and create their own solutions. And I think in that process, there's been this really, really strong emergence of fintech startups and other startups that have to break the challenges that they face in Argentina with the lack of infrastructure or the hardships that they face as a developing nation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that not just Argentina, but in Latin America, in fintech and in a lot of other industries, there's people solving problems that someone in the US might not even think is a problem because they just don't see it. And I think that's one of the more interesting problems to solve in LatAm.
And I believe that necessity breeds innovation, and Argentina has needed a lot of things. And, I think that because of that, it's created this emergence of really innovative and high-level entrepreneurs who are solving problems that, as you mentioned, might not exist in other parts of the world.
So it's difficult to forecast really anything into the future, but What do you think is next for the ecosystem in Buenos Aires and Argentina over the say the next 5+ years?
Well, I think that investors are going to start recognizing the potential in emerging markets, specifically in Latin America. And as we discussed, I believe that Argentina has the highest level of human capital in regards to entrepreneurship and startups. So I would like to believe that, and I do believe that investors are going to start recognizing the talent pool and the funding opportunities that are available in Argentina and around the region. And it's already starting. And I think there's been a lot of companies and corporations and investors that have had one foot in Argentina for a very long time. But because of this political instability that the country has faced and the economic climate, they've never really jumped in. And it makes sense. It's been a very historically risky place to invest in, both as far as operations or as, funding for startups. But I think, that all of that is changing, and the government recognizes that Argentina should be a player in terms of global capital markets. And I think it has the potential to be a big player. And I think that the investors that recognize that soonest are going to be the ones that have the highest return on their investment. So I hope and I expect that over the next 5 years or so, there's going to be, a much bigger influx of financial capital and venture capital and angel investment happening around the region and specifically in Argentina.
And what about you and Startup Buenos Aires? What's next for you and your team over the next 3 years?
That's a great question. I mean, if you would have asked us 3 years ago where we would be today, I wouldn't say where we are. So, for us, the most important thing to be is flexible, and we need to evolve with the change of the community and the change of the ecosystem. And, that happens and we need to react to it. So really, whatever the city needs and whatever the community needs, we're going to have to shape ourselves to become that resource for them. I personally would like to see Argentina turned into a global outsourcing hub, as we've seen in places like India or China, because, as I mentioned, the tech talent is truly prevalent and high quality and at a much lower cost than in other places. So, for us, we're going to be focusing on how we can change that perception around outsourcing and create this truly strong and sustainable offshoring hub in Argentina. But we will also remain, a very big player in the community, and we'd like to continue working with the government and other organizations to strengthen the ecosystem and, keep true to our original mission, which was to create a strong and sustainable ecosystem in Argentina and put Argentina on the map and bring more opportunities to the region.
So looking backward toward when you just started the business, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself if you could go back and talk to yourself in the past?
Learn Spanish sooner. I'm very lucky that Argentina has the highest level of fluency in English, so it allowed me to do business in my own language. But I think that came at a cost. There were a lot of opportunities I had to forego, a lot of speaking opportunities, a lot of meetings, because I just couldn't communicate effectively in the local language, and that was my fault. And that hindered the growth at times to the organization. So what I would have done was start studying Spanish much quicker.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really a good point, because you can get by without learning Spanish, but it really opens new doors if you can.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's just out of respect, if you're doing business in a foreign country, you can't expect people to conform to your own language. And you should show just that respect that you're here and you mean business and you're serious, and you're so serious in fact that you've learned the language and you want to conduct business in the local language that you're looking to build your business in. So I would also say that's a great piece of advice to anybody else who's looking to move abroad and start something. It's recognize that you are a guest and you are a visitor, and you should be learning that local language, and it'll help. It'll definitely open a lot more doors.
Yeah, and I think sales are hard enough as it is. So if you give someone another excuse to say no, which is doing it in their second language, it's not going to help you. So I think you're spot on with that.
Yep, definitely.
So looking at advice to other entrepreneurs who are thinking about getting started really anywhere or even in Latin America, do you have any books, blogs, podcasts, documentaries, or any other media that you like to recommend to people that they should take a look at?
One of my favorite books of all time, and it's very old, but it's really one of the best, is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I think it could be relatable today, tomorrow, and in many years to come. So that's one of my favorites. So yes, I think it's Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, that's a great book. We actually recommend that to a lot of our entrepreneurs and some of the teams that are starting to work, especially across borders into the US, because a lot of this stuff is relatable anywhere in the world, but it's especially important when you have cultural differences from LatAm to the US. And I think that's a great recommendation.
I also recommend this podcast and also Lavka. If you're interested in venture capital or financing or startups in Latin America, Lavka is a fantastic resource as far as newsletters and organizations. And they do host events all around the world. And I highly recommend them. And their team has just been incredible as far as shining a light on Latin America for institutional investors or for startups looking to scale. And I think they're great.
Yeah, I agree. They do an amazing job of highlighting the ecosystem.
Definitely.
Well, I thank you again for taking the time to do this. It's a really interesting conversation, and wish you the best with Startup Buenos Aires and continuing to grow it forward.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with my guest, Lisa Besserman. If you enjoyed it and you want to learn more about Argentina, check out episode 18 with Guimar Vaca Sidic, an Argentine entrepreneur and now investor, episode 10 with Patricio Williams from Pago Rural, or episode 9 with Diego Saez Gil, the co-founder of BlueSmart, or episode 7 with Nora Leary from Launchway Media. If you really like Crossing Borders, please share it with a friend. It's the best way for this podcast to grow. And the second best way is if you can give a rating on iTunes or Stitcher. It'd be very appreciated. Thanks again.